A peasant walks into Constantinople with nothing. No money, no connections, no family, no education. He speaks broken Greek with a thick Armenian accent. He owns the clothes on his back and nothing else. 30 years later, that same man sits on the throne of the Byzantine Empire, the most powerful political entity in the Christian world, commander of armies, controller of trade routes connecting Europe to Asia, emperor of a civilization that has survived 500 years while every empire around it collapsed. His name is Basil, and his rise from absolute poverty to absolute power is the most extraordinary story in Byzantine history. But here is what makes this story truly devastating. Everything Basil builds in 30 years of ruthless, brilliant, calculated work, his own son dismantles in 20 years of resentment and deliberate destruction. This is the story of how a slave became emperor through murder and genius, how he rebuilt a collapsing empire into a golden age, and how everything he achieved was undone by the one person he loved most, the son who hated him. But before understanding how a son destroys what a father builds, we need to see just how impossible Basil's rise actually was, because the circumstances he was born into should have made this story impossible. Yet here we are. The Byzantine Empire in 830 AD is an empire under pressure from every direction. Arab armies control Sicily and raid southern Italy. Bulgarian forces threaten the northern borders. Internal corruption hollows out tax revenues. The military is underfunded. Infrastructure is crumbling. Provincial governors operate as independent warlords, ignoring Constantinople entirely. This is an empire surviving on reputation, on the memory of past greatness, on bureaucratic sophistication that is slowly rotting from within. Into this environment, a peasant boy is born in Macedonia. His family may have been enslaved. His origins are deliberately obscured later when his background becomes politically inconvenient for the dynasty he will found. What is known is this: Basil grows up extraordinarily poor, rural poverty in a Macedonian village, no education, no prospects, no rational path to power that anyone could map. But Basil has things that cannot be taught: physical strength that becomes legendary across Constantinople, charm that makes powerful people trust him instantly and completely, intelligence that reads political situations faster than trained advisors who spent decades learning what Basil grasps intuitively, and complete absence of moral constraint when moral constraint becomes inconvenient. These qualities will take him from peasant to emperor, but the path requires decisions that reveal exactly what kind of man Basil truly is, decisions that should disqualify him from any position of trust, and yet somehow accelerate his rise instead. Basil walks to Constantinople as a young man, literally walks, he cannot afford transport. He arrives at the city gates with nothing, sleeps outside a church because he has no money for accommodation. A wealthy official named Theophilus finds him sleeping there, is immediately impressed by his extraordinary physical appearance, takes him in as a groom for his horses. This is Basil's first strategic relationship. He is not just a groom, he studies everything, works harder than anyone around him, makes himself indispensable not just as a worker but as a presence. Learns how power functions in Constantinople by watching his patron navigate it daily. Theophilus takes Basil to visit relatives in Greece. There Basil meets a wealthy widow named Danilis. She is immediately captivated, not romantically. She sees something in this young man that suggests destiny, something in his eyes that reads like inevitability. Danilis gives Basil money, fine clothes, social introductions, a foundation for entering Constantinople's elite circles. She is placing a calculated bet on him, and she will collect spectacularly when Basil becomes emperor and she becomes one of the wealthiest individuals in the empire. Back in Constantinople, Basil's patron introduces him to Caesar Bardas, the most powerful man in the empire after Emperor Michael III himself, and Bardas introduces Basil to the emperor. Michael III is young and dissolute, more interested in horse racing and drinking than governing an empire. He immediately likes Basil. The peasant's physical strength, humor, and complete lack of aristocratic pretension appeals to a young emperor surrounded by calculating courtiers. Basil becomes Michael's personal companion, wrestling partner, drinking confidant, trusted friend. He rises from groom to imperial favorite within months, but here is where Basil makes his first ruthlessly calculated move. Michael III has a mistress named Eudokia Ingerina. Basil marries her. Not because he loves her, because Michael loves her and cannot marry her himself. By marrying Eudokia, Basil becomes connected to the emperor's deepest personal affections, controls access to the woman Michael loves, becomes emotionally irreplaceable, not just practically useful. To make this work, Basil abandons his existing partner Maria completely, sends her away without hesitation or visible regret. This is the first clear indicator of how completely Basil can suppress personal feeling when political calculation demands it. Maria disappears from history. Basil moves forward without looking back. Basil is elevated to Chamberlain, then co-emperor. The peasant from Macedonia is officially the second most powerful person in the Byzantine Empire, but one obstacle blocks complete control. Caesar Bardas, the powerful official who first connected Basil to power. Bardas is brilliant, genuinely experienced, deeply suspicious of Basil, correctly suspicious. He sees exactly what Basil is doing and is working methodically to limit his influence before it becomes unstoppable. So Basil murders him. During a military expedition in 866 AD, Basil kills Bardas personally, in front of multiple witnesses, with Emperor Michael watching directly. Michael says nothing, does nothing, cannot do anything. Basil has made himself too necessary to punish. The man who gave Basil his first real introduction to power is dead, eliminated by the man he introduced. But the calculation is still not finished. Michael III begins to tire of Basil. The emperor is erratic and impulsive by nature. He elevates a new favorite named Basiliskianos, starts talking openly about making Basiliskianos co-emperor instead, about demoting Basil to irrelevance. Basil calculates the trajectory with cold precision. If Basiliskianos replaces him, Basil loses everything he has built, goes from near emperor to political liability, from power to prison or execution. He has murdered too many people to be allowed to simply retire. So Basil murders Michael III. September 24, 867 AD. Basil enters Michael's bedchamber while the emperor sleeps, kills him. The man who gave him everything, who elevated him from absolute nothing, who trusted him completely enough to make him co-emperor, who loved him like a brother. The next morning, Basil is proclaimed emperor. The peasant from Macedonia sits on the throne of Byzantium, the most powerful position in the Christian world achieved through 2 murders and a calculated marriage. And here is what happens next that absolutely nobody in Constantinople expects. He becomes one of the greatest emperors in Byzantine history. The man who achieved power through murder governs through excellence. This is the central paradox of Basil. The methods of his rise are completely monstrous. The quality of his rule is genuinely magnificent, because Basil understands something from his years of poverty that wealthy rulers never grasp. Institutions matter more than individuals. Power built into systems survives the man who built them. Power dependent on personality dies with the person. Emperor Basil I rules from 867 to 886 AD, 19 years that transform the empire. He begins with military reorganization. The Byzantine army has been deteriorating for decades, underfunded, poorly commanded, losing territory on multiple fronts simultaneously. Basil appoints competent commanders based entirely on demonstrated merit rather than aristocratic connections, funds proper equipment and intensive training, creates professional military units capable of projecting power rather than merely defending what remains. The results are immediate and dramatic. Byzantine forces reconquer territory in southern Italy that has been lost for decades, push back Arab forces threatening the eastern frontier, stabilize the Bulgarian border in the north. For the first time in a generation, the empire is expanding rather than contracting. He rebuilds the economic infrastructure. Byzantine prosperity runs on trade. Constantinople controls the intersection of European and Asian commerce, but decades of mismanagement have degraded every system making that trade profitable. Basil cracks down on corruption with systematic precision. Provincial governors stealing tax revenues are investigated without warning, prosecuted publicly, and replaced with loyal, competent officials. Imperial inspectors travel the roads constantly, arrive unannounced at provincial capitals, audit accounts in detail. interview local officials and ordinary citizens, report everything directly to Constantinople. Tax revenues triple within a generation, not because Basil raises taxes, because collection becomes honest for the first time in decades. The same lesson Darius the Great learned in Persia centuries earlier: eliminating corruption generates more revenue than raising rates ever could. He initiates comprehensive legal reform. Byzantine law has accumulated centuries of contradictions and outdated precedents. Basil orders systematic reorganization. The Basilica project begins under his direction. It will become the foundation of Byzantine legal order for 3 centuries after his death. He establishes the Macedonian dynasty with deliberate institutional depth, not just passing power to a son, creating frameworks of governance that can function under mediocre rulers because the systems are stronger than any individual. This is Basil's most important achievement, greater than any military victory, greater than any legal reform. The empire he builds can survive without him, because he built institutions, not just victories. But he makes one catastrophic error, an error not of calculation but of love, and it will undo everything. Basil I has a son named Constantine, whom he loves above all others. Constantine is brilliant, educated, cultured, politically sophisticated, everything Basil never had access to as a child. Basil pours enormous resources into Constantine's preparation for rule, sees in him the perfect continuation of everything built through blood and murder and 19 years of relentless governance. Constantine dies in 879 AD, a young man before inheriting anything. Basil is destroyed by grief in a way that his worst enemies never managed to destroy him. Contemporary sources describe him as fundamentally changed, diminished. The emperor who suppressed every personal feeling to acquire and maintain power cannot suppress this one loss. He has other sons, Leo, Stephen, Alexander, but they are not Constantine, do not have Constantine's qualities, do not inspire the same devotion or trust. And Leo has a specific problem that Basil suspects but refuses to confront directly. Leo may not be Basil's biological son. Remember Eudokia in Gerena. The mistress Basil married specifically to maintain emotional control over Emperor Michael. The child born from that calculated arrangement might be Michael's son, not Basil's. Basil suspects this deeply, cannot prove it, cannot disprove it, and cannot bring himself to act on the suspicion because acting means acknowledging what his marriage to Eudokia actually was, means acknowledging that his most calculated relationship produced the heir who will inherit his life's work. So Basil treats Leo with cold distance and persistent suspicion, never the warmth given to Constantine, never the trust extended to even his military commanders. Leo grows up in the imperial palace watching his father show affection to everyone except him, growing up knowing the most powerful man in the empire doubts whether he has the right to exist, growing up with resentment that hardens into something permanent and destructive. This resentment will cost the empire decades of painful progress. Leo VI becomes emperor in 886 AD after Basil's death. There are persistent rumors that Leo accelerated Basil's end, that the old emperor was seriously injured in a hunting accident and Leo ensured that proper medical care was delayed or misdirected. The historical record remains deliberately unclear on this point. The rumors never completely disappear. What is entirely clear is what Leo does the moment he holds power. He reverses everything his father built, not because the policies are failing, not because circumstances demand change, because they are his father's policies and erasing them means erasing Basil. Basil had appointed Photius as Patriarch of Constantinople, the most brilliant theological and intellectual mind of the entire Byzantine age, a genuine giant who strengthened Byzantine religious authority and cultural influence across the known world. Leo removes Photius within days of taking power, replaces him with his own younger brother Stephen, not because Stephen is remotely qualified for the position. Because Photius was Basil's most important appointment, and his removal sends an immediate message. Leo systematically reverses military appointments his father made through years of careful merit-based selection, removes commanders who know how to fight, replaces them with aristocratic favorites whose family connections matter more than battlefield competence. The military effectiveness Basil rebuilt through 2 decades of careful institutional development begins degrading immediately and visibly. He relaxes the anti-corruption measures that tripled imperial revenues. Provincial governors who had lived under constant threat of unannounced inspection find the inspectors arriving less frequently, asking fewer difficult questions, accepting more convenient answers. The extraction that Basil eliminated returns gradually, then suddenly. He abandons the Basilica legal reform project entirely. Byzantine law returns to its comfortable contradictory confusion. In 20 years, Leo VI reverses the trajectory of an empire his father spent 19 years painfully rebuilding, not through incompetence alone, through the active, sustained desire to erase a father's legacy from history. But here is what makes Leo VI historically fascinating rather than simply tragic. He is not unintelligent, he is in fact genuinely brilliant. Later historians call him Leo the Wise without irony. He writes sophisticated theological analysis, composes accomplished poetry. His military manual, the Tactica, demonstrates deep understanding of Byzantine strategic doctrine that would serve commanders for generations. He is entirely capable of excellent governance. He chooses systematic destruction instead. Because capability and willingness are fundamentally different things. Leo has the capability. He lacks the willingness to acknowledge that his father's system worked. Cannot give Basil credit for anything because giving credit means accepting the legitimacy of a man who looked at his own son and saw a stranger. This is the most expensive unresolved psychological wound in Byzantine history. One man's inability to separate his feelings about his father from his responsibility to the empire costs the Byzantine state decades of accumulated progress and thousands of lives in military campaigns that fail because competent commanders have been replaced with connected favorites. Modern organizations follow this identical pattern with disturbing consistency. Steve Jobs builds Apple through obsession forged in the specific experience of near bankruptcy and personal humiliation. The executives who join after Apple's revival, who never experienced 1997 when the company was weeks from permanent collapse, gradually treat that obsessive attention to quality as optional overhead rather than existential necessity. Henry Ford builds revolutionary manufacturing infrastructure from absolute nothing through relentless personal drive. His descendants inherit a functioning empire they never had to create, spend subsequent decades managing institutional decay they cannot properly diagnose because they never experienced building the institution. Rome's founding generation constructs republican institutions with genuine understanding of their fragility because those founders lived under tyranny and fought to escape it. Later generations inherit the republic as permanent furniture, treat its safeguards as bureaucratic inconvenience, until those safeguards are gone and tyranny returns wearing a new name. Every successful institution eventually faces the Basil and Leo problem. The builder understands fragility because they built from nothing and watched things fail. The inheritor treats the resulting success as the natural condition of the world rather than a maintained achievement requiring constant attention. The institutions that prevented catastrophe become invisible operating costs. Then they are eliminated as unnecessary expenses. Then catastrophe returns, and everyone wonders what happened. Basil understood this dynamic clearly, he just could not solve it, because the son he trusted with full confidence died young, and the son who lived long enough to inherit never understood the weight of what had been placed in his hands. That is the tragedy at the center of every empire that outlasts its founder. The builder and the inheritor, the founder and the son, the one who fought for everything and the one who received everything without fighting. The qualities that build empires are forged specifically in adversity, in failure, in poverty, in powerlessness, in understanding exactly what collapse looks and feels like from the inside. And adversity is precisely what success eliminates for the generation that follows. Basil proved that a slave can build an empire from absolute nothing. Leo proved that a prince raised in that empire can destroy it without ever understanding what he is destroying. And history keeps producing both in every empire, every corporation, every institution that eventually forgets why it was built and what it was built to prevent. Because you cannot protect what you never had to fight for, you cannot maintain what you never had to create, and you cannot understand the value of institutions you inherited fully formed and took completely for granted.